What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Permission to Shine podcast, where I, Andrew Nemani, gets to highlight the most incredibly inspiring but humble people all across the world. We go to Nepal, we go to Brazil, we go to Dallas, Texas, which is the case in today's episode. But first and foremost, I just got back from Leland, Michigan. They call this place the land of delight. And I'm here to tell you, it's true. This place is paradise. I feel like for the last decade, I've heard my friends talk about, like Harbor Springs, Michigan and Northern Michigan, this and that. And I'm like from Iowa, right? So like I shout out to the Midwest. We love those people. But I'm like, guys, can it really be that wonderful? It is. If you haven't been, you got to go check it out. Our friends Ben and Julia got married in Northern Michigan. They live in London, but it's a place that her family grew up. They're like 5 generations deep there. So we had an amazing crew. The Iowa people were representing. There's a lot of people from Harvard and Stanford. So it's always fun when you can get a really cool mix of people there together. So congratulations to Ben and Julia. We're back in LA, and we're going to be dropping this episode with Victor Vescovo, probably the most interesting person I've ever met. Definitely the most accomplished. Victor grew up in Texas, Dallas specifically, and he went on to go to Stanford for his undergraduate degree. He got a master's from MIT and an MBA from Harvard. Then he went into the Navy, where he became commander, specifically on intelligence. Wait till you hear about the projects this guy was doing over 20 years in the Navy. It's insane. But he didn't stop there, right? He goes on to start a private equity fund called Insight Equity Holdings. He did that for a long time. It made him an extremely wealthy man, which then allowed him to become this insane adventurer. He's done the 7 summits, which includes the tallest mountain in all 7 continents, including Mount Everest, standing 29,000 feet tall. Then the guy falls in love with the oceans and decides that he wants to go to the bottom of all 5 oceans. Negative 35,000 feet. That's insane. This guy's an animal. He's gone to the North Pole, the South Pole. He went into outer space. The guy knows no limits. And the lessons he shares today are incredibly inspiring. So please enjoy this episode with the most interesting man in the world, truly a walking bucket list, Victor Vescovo. I would love to hear your takeaways. There's so many. Reach out to me, andrew@permissiontoshine.org. It's the place to get a hold of me. I love it when you guys reach out. I get several emails a week, so keep those coming. I love you guys. Thank you for trusting me with your time. Please enjoy yet another episode of Permission to Shine.
You are by far one of the most accomplished people I've gotten the chance to meet. What's fascinating to me is I think people who've accomplished as much as you kind of self-promote, right? They're out there, they're kind of sharing what they do, whether it's for the glory or whether it's to share inspiration. But you're somebody who's kind of off the map in a way. You don't really have social media. And I'm curious what your thought process has been in that.
In many respects, I'm introverted by nature. So it's not something I've ever really aspired to do, which is to promote myself. I prefer to do things. That's what I derive enjoyment from. That's what I think is the essence of who I am. I like to plan difficult things and try to accomplish them. If people are interested and they want to talk to me about them or give me recognition, I'm not going to refuse it. I'm not going to be a jerk about it, but that's not something that really I need or desire is promotion of myself or my brand. I am just so involved in the activities. I love doing the things.
Where did that doing mentality come from?
I just think it's genetic. It's my personality. I've always been extremely curious. And I've mentioned to other people that probably the most dangerous thing that my parents ever did was give me a bicycle here in Dallas when I was about 10 years old. And that was kind of the last they saw of me for like a year because I was just constantly trying to find new places and explore. And that was really for my own enjoyment. It was just me and my bike exploring. That's what I like to do.
Would you do that? I loved my bike as a kid. It was my true love, and cycling is still a love. I always loved it because it was with friends, right? Mm-hmm. So it was an activity. Were you doing this on your own or with friends? Always on your own?
I would do it with friends once in a while, but really it was about going off and exploring myself because what's the old expression, he who travels fastest travels alone. And I definitely have found that to be the case. Like anybody out there knows how much more rapid can you do things when you do it just with yourself or with your family of 4. Everything becomes a coordination effort. Everything else requires multiple inputs. It's the nature of systems that the smaller the team or the individual, the faster and more adaptable you can be in a situation.
That's so interesting, because I'm somebody who, like, I was in sales, right? And so sometimes I just want to be on my own. I'm like, if I'm going to go close this deal, like, get the F out of my way and let me go close this thing.
Right.
But now I've become much more of a team player, and I've been realizing the power of a team. How is your evolution through that curve?
Oh, definitely. I think as we grow older, we learn to adapt to the situation. So I think you start with what your true nature is, which in my case, and it sounds a little bit like yours, was to be much more individualistic, rely on your own resources. But as you grow older, you realize there are some problems that are just too big for just yourself to deal with. And so you learn how to harness the power of organizations, but always with that mentality that you bring to the table of, well, I could do it myself if I really needed to, or let's do it as efficiently as possible. People that love to build large organizations more than they need to, I think is indicative of people that are more in a situation where they're less secure with themselves and they rely on other people. But when you rely on other people, I think that can create instability and weakness in a system. So you need a combination. A single individual could not build the Panama Canal. It took the entire resources of the U.S. government and the Panamanians to do that. But you could do it in an inefficient or an efficient way. And that's the real trick of business, of doing difficult technological projects. It's making that balance between efficiency and what you can do by yourself.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a healthy balance to be out on your own, training on your own, right? Like if you're mountain training or if you're cycling on your own, you're out there, you're getting tougher on your own. And then the minute you get back in a team, you're so much stronger in those situations.
Right. I think it's pretty interesting how when I was training for mountain climbing, I ended up having a trainer in Seattle, Washington, and she would just give me a list of things I had to do each week. And
what were some of them?
Well, they were lifting, aerobic. I mean, you have to train your entire body to climb Mount Everest. So it was a whole variety of things. Training 6 days a week for several hours, if not more. And it was interesting that I would just do what she told me to do. Well, why wouldn't I? But other people, I learned, they like to train with other groups of people, group runs, group this, group that. And that was just so alien to me. I said, well, what would you do if you ran out of time during the day? I would work out at like 2 a.m. if I had to complete my task. But,
2 a.m. you were working out?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like if I was traveling and on business and I had a full work day and I stumbled into my hotel room at like 1 a.m. because of a delayed flight, but it's like, oh gosh, I didn't do my workout today. I guess I got to go downstairs and do my workout.
Dude, no one can call you lazy.
Well, no, but that's another thing we haven't talked about yet, which is self-discipline. At the end of the day, I think that's the most important virtue a human being can have, which is the ability to decide to do something and then do it. That's self-discipline. If you have extreme self-discipline, life is just a series of you deciding what you want to do and then pointing yourself in that direction and letting that discipline carry you through to either a success or a failure. But even if you have a failure, that self-discipline is going to go, okay, what did we just learn? Can we change or make it better and go around that problem and solve it? But self-discipline is the key. And it is the cure for people that might have a little bit of laziness in their personality. But at the end of the day, self-discipline is about training your mind to do what you want to do in life.
So for our listener who wants to improve their self-discipline, what advice do you have for them?
It's difficult. It's in many respects, it's a very binary thing. Either you have it or you don't. If you decide to do this thing, do it. Oh, it's too hard, whatever. Well, then don't decide to do it. But you have to make a commitment and then keep trying. Keep trying until you fail. You fall down, but don't give up. That's the other issue. If you give up easily, you're not going to have very good self-discipline. You have to have the strength of will to see things through and do hard things. But I mean, you're talking to someone who climbed mountains pretty intensively for 20 years. That is an exercise in deliberately putting yourself in uncomfortable and dangerous situations. And yet people that do that seek that. So self-discipline is usually very common among mountaineers, but other people that don't even get mountain climbing, I think it's harder to convey just what it takes to be really, really self-disciplined. It is literally a matter of, I'm going to do this and I'm almost going to die trying unless I do this thing. That's the mentality you have to have.
I love that. You've accomplished so much. And so I'm really curious, when you think about what you're most proud of, what comes to mind? And we talked about this a little bit before we started recording. The podcast is called Permission to Shine because I love having humble people on who don't naturally share their accomplishments with the world, right? It's why you're here sitting in that seat today. It's why I feel so lucky to be talking to you, Victor. And one thing I love doing with my guests is doing a 60-second brag. And so I want to take 60 seconds on the clock and just list the things that when you're on your deathbed someday, you're going to be like, I am so glad I did X, Y, and Z.
Okay, I'm uncomfortable doing this, and I don't really like doing this. It's not my nature, but I'll do it for you.
Thank you, Victor. All right, we're going to start in 3, 2, 1, go.
One of the things I'm most proud of is that I was able to climb Mount Everest, and it took 2 tries. So I failed once because I got frostbite half the way up, but eventually I made it up. But that was a physical, mental, even spiritual battle against Mother Nature, and so it was incredibly satisfying to do that. I'm extremely proud that I was able to assemble a team and design, build, and then personally pilot a submersible to the bottom of all 5 of the world's oceans and do the first repeated dives to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. I've now been there 15 times to show just how powerful that instrument we created was. I'm very proud of the fact that I was able to get on a rocket flight. It's something I've wanted to do since I saw Neil Armstrong walk on the moon when I was 3 years old. And so, yeah, I was the first person ever to go to the bottom of the ocean, to climb Mount Everest and go into space. But I'm also proud that I learned how to fly when I was 19, and I've been flying aircraft ever since, which
60
is a great
seconds.
joy. Oh, okay.
You did it.
All
Good
right.
job, man.
Right.
That's a lot there.
So, all right, good. It's over.
Mount Everest, going back for your second time, how hard was it to quit the first time? Wave the white flag.
There's a funny, quick story on that. When I failed the first time, I got frostbite on my hands. I didn't take adequate care of them, so I couldn't use the ropes. So I was a danger to myself and my team. So I decided live to fight another day. And on my way out of the Everest National Park, I came to a park ranger stand, and he had this big book, like out of an Indiana Jones movie, where he was logging people in and out of the park. And he opened the book, and he took down my name and said, okay, what day did you summit? And I said, oh, I didn't summit. He just looked at me, he just closed the book. Didn't even finish the entry. It was just like, you don't even matter because you didn't succeed. I felt like, 1 inch high.
Peanuts.
And it was just painful. But that's when I resolved. I said, I am definitely coming back, and I will do whatever it takes to climb this mountain. And 2 years later, I came back after a lot more training, better equipment. I was much more diligent about taking care of my hands, and was able to summit. And it was absolutely brutal to do that. It is a very, very tough thing to do.
I don't think people realize the commitment it takes. How long from when you left Dallas, Texas to return?
2 months.
Yeah.
It takes 2 months to climb Everest because it's a physiological battle. You only have a third as much oxygen at the summit of Everest than you do down here. So your O2 saturation, like on summit day, is like in the 70s. You'd be admitted to the hospital here if it was that low here in sea level. And it's just a mental battle. You are always sick. You're coughing. It's not a place human beings are meant to be. So it is just a constant assault on your mind and your spirit. You just want to go down, but you just have to dig down and just say, I'm going up. I'm going to keep going up. Unless it's, obviously too dangerous to continue. But if it's not, I'm going to keep going up until I succeed. And we did.
What's the cost?
It depends. You can do it cheaply, in which case you're taking significantly more risk, potentially even of dying and jeopardizing other climbers or requiring them to give up their summit attempt to rescue you. Or you can spend a lot more money, have a much larger team, more Sherpa for support, more oxygen, more experienced guides. It's like anything in life. You often get what you pay for.
Mm-hmm.
But it's in the 6 figures to do it well.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's insane. You've had to manage a lot of risk, right? What we haven't talked about is that you've been a very successful investor as well.
Yeah.
And I'm curious how you think about and manage risk.
Well, there are, in many respects, 3 categories of risk. There are the risks that when you're going into an investment or you're going mountain climbing, this risk, and then you make the proper accommodations for it. For example, let's use mountain climbing as an example. Okay, I'm going up this mountain. What are the risks? Oh, you can get frostbite. Okay, well, been there, done that. I need this piece of equipment, and I'll go through this process. Then there are the known unknowns. Okay, I'm going to a new mountain I've never climbed before. Okay, well, that's a manageable thing. I'll get the satellite pictures. I'll talk to people that have been there before. I'll mitigate that risk by collecting as much information and putting bounds around what are reasonable risks. Now, it's no guarantee because things can happen. Oh, we didn't know about that avalanche risk, or we didn't know about this or that. But, it's semi-quantifiable. You just have to make allowances. And then there's the third category, which is the killer, the one that kills people in business, on mountains, in the ocean. And those are the so-called Donald Rumsfeldian unknown unknowns. Human beings are terrible at assessing and mitigating risks that they don't foresee.
Blind spots.
And they're big, and they can kill you or destroy an investment. But human beings don't really get trained on how to assess those risks or how to mitigate them. It happens all the time in engineering. How much safety margin do you put into an aircraft design? How much extra equipment or oxygen do you take on a mountain climb? And we always want to minimize those risks, because if we overestimate them, we would never do it.
Mm-hmm.
It would be too resource intensive, or, oh, that's too dangerous. So there's this constant battle between the optimists wanting to minimize that unknown risk, and then the people that, the Chicken Littles are like, oh my God, that's too dangerous, it'll never work. And there's no right answer there. There's only a lot of experience to figure out how much extra margin, how much extra equipment, how much extra money do you need to mitigate for the inevitable unknown unknowns. But that's also why, we've spoken about this a little bit offline, why so many venture capital investments, sometimes 7, 8, 9 out of 10 fail. It's because there are so many unknown unknowns that you can't adequately appreciate going into them, and they will come up and bite you. The world is an incredibly dynamic, unknown place. People need to get that. And while it's nice to stay safe and warm in your little bubble, if you want to have an interesting and productive life, you've got to go out there and interact with the real world.
Mm-hmm.
And that means uncertainty. And that means you have to learn how to mitigate risk. To me, life is one long series of learning how to manage risk.
There's so much there.
And that includes relationships.
So, like, nowadays in cars, we've got blind spot detectors, which are awesome, right? And I think of, like, my friend Caleb. He's a genius, and I love keeping him around because he is my blind spot detector. He thinks so differently than I do. What are your blind spot detectors?
Ooh. One is, obviously, I try and read as much as possible. I am constantly consuming
Articles, books,
everything. I am a voracious carnivore for information of all kinds, but particularly practical knowledge. Like, I'm interested in like anything, and a lot of it just comes from experience. Like when I'm looking at a factory to invest in, I know a lot of the questions to ask because I've been through 100 factories and I know where they typically break. So a lot of it is experience. A lot of it is just about reading from other people that are experts in their field and taking their accumulated experience. What's the old expression? A smart person is someone that learns from their mistakes. A brilliant person is someone who learns from other people's mistakes. A genius is someone who reads so much that they have learned all the mistakes ever made. That's why I love history. There's nothing that hasn't happened before. Not necessarily the exact same thing, but I guarantee you it rhymes.
What are the things that when you see an investment, like just really fire you up and you're like, man, I gotta be involved in that?
Well, as a venture capitalist, if it's transformational or would make people go, wow, if this product or this process can be developed. For example, I'm an investor in Colossal Biosciences here in Dallas, and their objective is to de-extinct species, literally bring back species.
Dinosaurs are coming back?
Not dinosaurs.
Ah, damn it.
No,
I want to pet one.
Yeah, I don't think we want to introduce Velociraptors anytime soon. Now, these are species usually extincted by man that died in the last 20,000 years. So we have a lot of their DNA. And that allows us to be able to do the math, do the science to potentially bring them back. And when we birth our first animal that previously is what was extinct, that will be an amazing moment. So that's the kind of situation where you invest money behind an idea that even if it fails, at least you're pushing the ball forward a little bit for the next team or the next group. And that's one of the more rewarding things about private equity and venture capital is investing money to hopefully be successful with the investment, but also to move us technologically forward as a species.
Mm-hmm. What about the entrepreneur itself? What are things that really excite you about a leader?
What excites me most about leaders that I meet and interview are those that are at their core, they're problem solvers. And they also tend to be very direct and frankly, a little bit unemotional, because at the end of the day, if you're an intuitive, emotional type of individual, I'm not sure that that's the best suited personality type to be an entrepreneur, because there are so many variables. There are so many very hard decisions that you have to make, sometimes very, very quickly, that you need a certain temperament, I think, to be very, very effective. People always point out to Elon Musk, and I think in many respects he is kind of an icon. He's extremely brilliant, but he also makes incredibly rough decisions, and he does it quickly with no remorse by all accounts, but he's effective. You know, this is not a popularity contest when you're starting a new business. It's about what can you get done, and also critically important, can you adapt? Can you actually say, oh, this isn't working, we need to do this other thing instead, even though it's 180 degrees different than what I've said before. No pride. You have to be able to turn on a dime and just say, well, I have new information, I'm going to change my mind and do this instead. And so many people have such great difficulty with that. So I'm looking for engineer type personalities that can work well in a team, but don't necessarily have to, that get numbers, that know accounting, that know the difference between cash flow and working capital. Those are core concepts. Those are the people you look for. Yes. I'm not really into people that are very self-promotional, that are all about sales, that are about vision, and, you know, wear a boom mic at their investor meetings. I have no time for people like that. There are a lot of flash, and I have not found them to be very effective.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting in our first conversation, you were talking about, I hope I remember this correctly. You were like, I met with the CEO entrepreneur, and he's like, there's a 5% chance of this working or something like that.
Yep.
And so often we have these entrepreneurs who are like, inflating their models to say, this is going to be a multi-billion-dollar business, right? And just like sell, vision. And I love that you're like, no, let's be real. Business is hard, and there is a 5% chance that this works.
Correct.
It's just so healthy to acknowledge that, I think.
Yeah. Well, the guy that I'm investing with, he's a former guy from SpaceX, and we're doing potential exploratory asteroid mining. Let's talk about something that is out there. I also give it a relatively low probability of success. But the issue is, if it works, it is truly transformational. The financial upside is massive, but also at a human level. If we can mine asteroids effectively for platinum group metals, and we don't have to dig in the earth here much less efficiently than just going out and getting them on rocks up in space, it's a big deal.
Why?
But it's really hard.
It's like it's an energy source, or walk that through for us common folks.
They're just dense. I mean, there could be asteroids in near Earth orbit between the Earth and Moon, or just outside the Moon, that are just chock full of extremely rare minerals, and they're incredibly dense.
What does that do for us?
Well, it's huge, because you could go there and mine them incredibly efficiently and literally drop them back onto the planet. You wouldn't have to scrape and strip mine hundreds of thousands of tons of ore to get, a couple of pounds of gold. It's just there on an asteroid that you could much more efficiently mine. But the issue is, it is rocket science. It's really hard, but it is an engineering problem. The other big principle that I always go by is, if something isn't physically impossible, if it doesn't violate the laws of physics, it is a matter of engineering and resources. Doesn't mean it's profitable. Doesn't mean, it's worth doing. But if it doesn't violate the laws of physics, it is an engineering problem. And I think Elon did a great job of showing that when he started landing rockets 2 at a time, when people thought 20 years ago, that's a long way off. And he just went and did it, because it's a physics problem and an engineering problem. And sure, rockets blew up, but then they learned from that. Same way with anything that we're going to do in space. You try, you fail, repeat, perfect, and then you have something interesting.
Mm-hmm. You went into outer space.
Yeah, I did.
What was that experience like?
I strapped myself to a 10-story bomb. Yeah, the first time I ever went supersonic was strapped to a seat going vertically at Mach 3, which was pretty cool. But
so casual. I love it.
Yeah. But I did a lot of analysis. I went on Blue Origin's, New Shepard, Flight 21, and it was amazing. And of course, I studied the rocket and all of its safety systems. I talked to their engineers directly. I inspected the vehicles and all that. And I came away very, very impressed with their whole program, and I felt very comfortable because it was an automated flight. There was no pilot.
Wow. How many passengers?
There were 6 of us, and we had a great team.
Was Cowboy Jeff Bezos on the flight?
No, Jeff was a couple of flights before ours, and but I did get to sit in William Shatner's seat, which was pretty fun.
Wow.
Because I adore Star Trek. So it was a 10-minute ride. Yeah, it was up and down, suborbital flight. But I think it was an amazing experience, and I know that a lot of people will be critical, going, "Oh, that's just a joyride for some rich people to go up in space." But I do want to point out that yes, I think there's some validity to that. But it's like the early days of flight. People would pay $20, even $30, which was a lot of money back in the 20s, to go up in this thing called an airplane, and through more and more people going up in the air, they built more economical, safer, more repeatable flights, where now you and I can get on a flight to London and be there tomorrow morning and think nothing of it. Space travel is the same way. You need people spending money and going up so we can build the experience to make it more economical, safe, et cetera. So we're just part of that early phase. So, if people want to spend their money doing any number of things, let them do it.
Push it forward.
If it's not hurting anybody, why not,
It's probably like TVs back in the day, right? TVs were like $5,000, you know, and inefficient. And now you can get one for like $300 at Target.
Right. Or think about cars. The first cars were death traps, but people would buy them, and, they were allowed to get on the roads and hitting horses and God knows what else. But over time, now we have airbags, autopilot, and they're much safer and they're more efficient. Space travel, I think, is going to follow the same route. So if someone wants to spend a lot of money to go up in space and look out a window, yeah, but I also think there's a huge value in that as well. That's a whole separate discussion about the so-called overview effect of what happens to you psychologically when you actually see the Earth from space.
Whoa, what is the overview effect?
Well, it was coined by the Apollo astronauts, and it's a description of a psychological effect that happens when you look down on Earth from space.
I've done it for so long.
And it's real. It's a real thing. And I think it affects different people to a different degree. Some people are overwhelmed by it. Some people, it's like, But when you're looking down on the planet, it is gorgeous. It's one of the most beautiful things you can ever see, is the black background of space, the very thin, almost effervescent stream of atmosphere. You see no boundary lines. You see all the browns and the blues and the puffy clouds. And you really get deeply affected by saying, this is such a beautiful place that we live on. And immediately, I think it comes in your head going, why do we treat it so badly? Why do we treat each other so badly? It almost at a visceral level makes you want to do better after seeing it from that vantage point. And that's why I think a lot more people should go into space just for that reason, so they can have that experience, especially if they're in politics or make policy. I think it's important because I don't think there's any negative effect for people going into space. There is only upside.
Wow.
And that's from personal direct experience. And I've been in space, I've been to the summit of Everest, and I've been at the bottom of the ocean, and space was the most powerful one. Everest, you just feel happy that you're alive and you survived. The bottom of the ocean is pretty different, and that's more intimidating. The ocean doesn't want you down there.
And that's at negative 35,000 feet?
Yeah, 35,000 feet down below, yeah. And it's 16,000 pounds per square inch, which is just an insane level of pressure. So when you go from the surface of the Earth to space, you go from 1 atmosphere of pressure to 0, a vacuum. When you go to the bottom of the ocean, you're going from 1 atmosphere to 1,100. You would be dead before your brain could even register you were dead if there's an implosion or some other catastrophic event. And you can't stay down there very long because it's just destroying the vessel that you're in, the seals, the materials, and all that. So it's a very forbidding place. And you can only see 30 meters or so because it's so dark, and the water doesn't allow light to penetrate. So it's just a very ominous place. But it was special in that respect, that it was an amazing place to visit because no one goes there. And that felt, like you're really exploring an alien planet. So they're all very different experiences, but to really affect people and have them appreciate the world that we live in, going to space, there is no substitute.
Sounds like it really unites you, right? And realizes that we're all on one team after all.
Yes. Yeah, and you felt that with your crew, with the 6 people I was bouncing around in 0G with. Those are people I'd only met a few days before, and now we're friends for life. And we're all different creeds and colors and backgrounds, and yet we were all there together in that little spaceship, just like we are here on Earth.
Is there a mission that made you most nervous that you can remember?
Which one? Several. Actually, it's interesting. A lot of the pilots that may be listening to this may appreciate this, but what people don't get, if you've been flying as long as I have since I was 19, yeah, there are some missions when you get into them and things start going sideways. When you're in a general aviation aircraft and you get into icing conditions or having an in-flight emergency, that's serious. That's up to you to get
You've
out.
had those?
Yeah.
As a pilot?
Oh, yeah. I've had 2 in-flight emergencies. And I fly helicopters, too. Thank God.
Didn't you own a helicopter?
Yeah. I never had an in-flight emergency in a helicopter. Thank God. That would be intense. But I have had them in a general aviation aircraft. And, the training kicks in, as they always say. Okay, well, that's going on. Well, okay, how do we mitigate that? And you do what you need to do, get on the ground. And I did in the 2 instances. They weren't serious ones. They weren't like a fire or anything like that, but they were enough where I had to get on the ground.
Were you by yourself or did you have passengers?
Once was by myself and once was with 2 passengers.
That's terrifying.
Yeah. And I remember my friends who were with me, 2 of them, and they could tell I was doing a rapid descent to get on the ground. They said, is something wrong? I said, I'll tell you on the ground. Let me focus.
Literally. So I think that a lot of our listeners are people who naturally put themselves in very stressful situations, right? A lot of high achievers.
Good for them.
Yeah. What have you learned about managing stress? When it kicks in, what do you think is most helpful to be prepared in those moments?
Have the ability to put it in a box and channel it or ignore it. And at the end of the day, that's really what happens. Panic never solved any issue. You have to be able to control yourself as much as possible in a very stressful environment. And that just comes from experience. That's why, a little bit each day. Well, I think there's another expression I remember hearing. I don't remember who said it. It said, do something every day that scares you a little bit. And I think if you do that, don't take reckless risks, but just put yourself out there a little bit every day, a little more. And then, like taking a little bit of poison each day, eventually you'll become not necessarily immune to it, but you'll be able to not become victim of it.
Adapt.
So that when you get in a true difficult situation, you'll react appropriately and focused. That's exactly what they do in the military, like they did for me. Not that I was a combat soldier, but that's what they're basically doing with combat drills. They just train you over and over again. If you get ambushed, you're going to do this and you're going to do this. And they make you do it over and over and over again where it becomes muscle memory. And so the stress is kind of ignored or put to the side because you're dealing with the problem. You can get scared, have a stiff drink afterwards, but, that's the way you deal with those difficult situations. Same thing learning how to fly a helicopter. It was amazing that half the training of flying a helicopter is, okay, what are you going to do when the engine goes out? And that is a very stressful situation. It's like you have seconds, if that, to pull the collective up, to do this and that, pick your spot on the ground, put the helicopter in the proper configuration to land, get on the ground. That it happens like in 5 to 10 seconds. There is no time to panic, no time to be stressed. The training kicks in and you do it automatically and safely. So that's what you do. You train.
Wow. Are there routines or things you try to do quite frequently in your current life that just make you feel the most you?
Flying. I have to confess, again, anyone who's a pilot listening to this is going to get it. I'll never forget a comment by someone, I think it was my sister, who said, I always know when you're happy. And I said, why? Because you probably flew that day. It's just a feeling of independence, of getting in a complex craft, taking it into the air. I mean, that's something Leonardo da Vinci never got to do. And I can go out to my hangar and get in my plane and go fly.
It's fascinating.
It's awesome. And it's dynamic. You're talking to air traffic controllers. You're seeing the ground, not like from space, but you're still up there like a bird. It's just incredibly rewarding. And it's dependent on you. You can't, why don't you land the plane? If you're up there by yourself, this is all about you. You have to manage air traffic control. You've got to land the plane safely. You. And it's a confidence builder. That's why I always tell younger people, if you have any inclination whatsoever to fly a plane, even just a glider, go do it. Because it teaches you so many wonderful lessons about risk management, about having self-confidence, about learning systems.
What's your next flight?
Next week, I'm headed to Arizona. I'm getting a glider rating.
What is that?
I'm going to learn how to fly gliders.
Wait, what?
Yeah. Yeah. I've always wanted to do it, fly without an engine. And it's different. It's a lot of geometry, a lot of math, but it's a new skill. I mean, you never stop learning, right? I'm also learning Italian, right?
How many languages does that make?
This would be my 5th.
Dang.
But I love languages, and I tend to remember them, and I'm of Italian descent, so why not? But I just love learning things. And I think, how many times have you read or heard that if you keep your mind active, you don't age as quickly?
Keep evolving.
Right. Keep evolving. Keep challenging yourself. I can't think of anything worse than just sitting on the couch hour after hour watching TV, even if it's interesting. You know, I love sports too. I love watching movies, but don't become a couch potato. Get out there in the real world too and experience it directly. I think there's a huge danger of so many people falling into this soft bubble cocoon of virtual reality, of streaming television, of YouTube and TikTok. And it's addictive, but it's not healthy. And I think human beings should interact in the real world.
One thing we haven't talked a lot about is you had a 20-year career in the Navy.
Yeah.
And your final title was a deputy head of intelligence?
Yes, on the reserve side for 7th Fleet, which faces China and North Korea.
What the hell does that mean? It sounds so interesting.
Well, I had a bit of a unique background where I always studied military history since the first book I ever checked out of a library was a military history book. So that gives you some indication of my proclivities, but love military history. And I got a master's degree in quantitative analysis of defense problems. And I had some language capabilities, and out of the blue, the U.S. Navy called me and they said, "We have a special program for people like you. You know, you want to become an intelligence officer in the U.S. Navy Reserve." I said, "Well, that sounds kind of interesting." He said, "Yeah, we'll give you a security clearance. We'll teach you a trade." And so I got a commission in 1993 when I was in business school, and I was trained as an intelligence officer, starting off as a targeting officer. And they leveraged my industrial background to basically, in times of conflict, if literally we're bombing a country, you know, okay, what's the most effective and efficient way to bomb these targets, or to achieve this effect? What do you need to do? And that actually happened.
As in like location?
Yeah. I mean, I was involved in the Kosovo conflict where I was on the targeting staff for NATO when we were bombing Serbia. So we had targets out there, and they said, okay, we want to turn off the electricity in Belgrade for 3 days. What's the best target for that? And I said, well, you probably want the electrical transformer stations because that'll take it off for this long and this. Okay, well, how many bombs would we need to drop? How can we minimize the civilian casualties? All those things, a lot of math. And that's what I did for 10 years. And then 9/11 happened. And then I was cross-trained because one of my languages is Arabic. I was cross-trained in counterterrorism. So I was involved in intelligence collection for counterterrorism I went away for a year and a half, and that was an interesting.
Where did you go?
I was based in Pearl Harbor, but my area of operations was the Pacific. So that's kind of where I hung out. And then the last assignment that I had, I was given the position of deputy head of intelligence for the 7th Fleet on the reserve side. So if there'd been a war, they would have called us up, and we would have gone to the command ship in the Pacific, the Blue Ridge, and I would have been on the intelligence staff and been involved in whatever we were up to. So that was fascinating. So for 2 or 3 years, I was directly involved in analyzing and looking at a lot of the situations on the Pacific Rim.
Did you have to go in the field for a lot of these missions?
Yeah, I did 5 exercises in Korea. I did multiple exercises from the USS Nimitz, from the USS Blue Ridge, the command ship, doing war games, analysis, all sorts of things.
Interesting. Remember the craziest place you went? Was there ever a place that was like, man, I do not want to come back here?
Yeah, technically I went to North Korea. We got taken up to the demilitarized zone at Panmunjom, and there's a table in a room at the border. And if you walk around the border, technically you're in North Korea. And so they let a couple of us do that. But that was very nerve-wracking because there were North Korean guards like right outside. It was not a place I want to be. It's a very, very tense place, but I couldn't help it. I had to say that I went to North Korea.
You got to scratch the itch. Did you ever work with like hostage situations?
Yes. I was directly involved in hostage location and a potential rescue operation for 2 Americans we had in the Philippines that were being held by an Islamic terrorist group. I was directly on that team. Yeah.
Did they make it out?
There was a rescue operation conducted by the Philippine military, and one of them was killed in the operation, and the other one was wounded.
Oh.
Yeah.
How'd that make you feel?
It made me feel frustrated because we were not allowed to send our own team in, the SEALs, because it was on Philippine soil, and that would have violated the Philippine Constitution. And we sent that all the way up, from what I gather, all the way to the White House saying, can we please send in our guys just this once? And the answer came back, no, we couldn't violate Philippine sovereignty. So they said, the word came back down, you need to give your intelligence and all your information over to the Philippines so they can do the operation. That was painful to do that. And they did, and they did the operation, and it didn't go great. And so that happened. But we got Gracia Burnham out, the woman. Her husband got killed.
Husband and wife, wow.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your service.
Oh, no, of course. It was a privilege and an honor to serve. It's one of the greatest things I've ever done with my life.
Were there any big kind of leadership tactics or takeaways that you've still kept with you?
Oh, my goodness. I think anyone who's listening who's been in the military knows there are a lot of leadership lessons you get by serving in the military, because it's a command and control authoritarian organization, and you see amazing leaders and you see terrible leaders. And probably the best thing that you can get from the military is learning how not to be a bad leader, because it's
valuable.
It's so in your face when you see a bad one. And the good ones are great too. Just watch Band of Brothers, right? Which is probably one of the best things ever put on television, in my view. You have Lieutenant Sobel, who's like the exemplar of how not to be a leader. And then you have, of course, the other members of the team that did extremely well. The military teaches you a lot about leadership and how to be an effective or ineffective leader. And hopefully I was a decent one.
I bet you were.
I hope I was. A lot of it just comes from leading by example. That was the first lesson you learn, which is, can you do the job? And don't just slough it off to other people. Or are you so obsessed with your own career that, you sacrifice other people, or it's obvious that you're just trying to get ahead? Do the work.
Right.
Do the work yourself.
That's how you get respect, right?
Absolutely. Are you able to do X, Y? I wasn't a field guy, knowing how to field strip an M16, but I could do intelligence work. I knew how to analyze imagery. I knew how to analyze networks. I knew how to get stuff done in the intelligence apparatus and how to prioritize targets. And, when you do that, people look up to you, they'll follow you, and, you'll get promoted and given more responsibility. But, it's about doing the job and doing the job well. I'll never forget one report I read on one officer who was a nice guy, but not a very good leader. And I think on his fitness report, it was written that his men would follow him, but only out of curiosity. You don't want to be that guy.
No, don't be that guy. 5 deeps.
Yeah.
You've been to the deepest part of all 5 oceans in a submarine. What do you wish people knew about the ocean?
That it is really, really, really big. And most of it, mind you, 75% is completely unexplored. Half of our planet is still completely unexplored, not even mapped. Because 71% of the Earth is ocean and 75% is completely unexplored. That is the last great exploration mission on our planet. And that's something I'm hoping to address by designing and building a dedicated mapping vessel to break the cost curve on doing that. So that's a side issue. But the other issue is the ocean is not a dumping ground for our crap. It is the source of most of the life on this planet. It generates more oxygen than any other place on Earth, more than the Amazon. We need to treat it better because we treat it terribly. And it could have a profound effect on us here on land if we don't understand it better, explore it more so we can understand it, and simply just treat it better. Plastic in the ocean, strip mining it for fishing, deep sea mining, all these other things that would just destroy the environment down there. We need to treat it with as much respect as we do the land.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. I think that's really well said. How long does it take you to get, so you had a submarine built, obviously a very impressive one. So what did that cost? Can you share that?
It's been reported in the public media, but the submersible cost in excess of $30 million.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Yeah. It's going to negative 35,000 feet. So that makes sense. 16,000 pounds of pressure per inch.
Yeah. And it was designed to do it repeatedly and safely. And it was designed with certification, which meant it was certified by third agencies, German even, like as safe as an airliner. That comes at a cost. But when I got in that submersible, I always knew I was coming back.
And how long would you be in it?
Oh, the longest mission I had was when I went to the bottom of the ocean with Hamish Harding, a British guy, and we were down at the bottom for 4.25 hours, but the whole mission took 14 hours. It took 4.5 hours to get to the bottom.
Okay, that's pretty quick. To go down 35,000 feet?
Yeah. Well, you're dropping about a meter per second.
Wow.
So it was designed to go up and down in the water efficiently. But it is 4.5 hours to the bottom, and then you're down there for 4 hours or so, and then another 4 hours to come back up.
I mean,
and
yeah,
it gets cold.
That's it.
Yeah. People go, well, why don't you put in air conditioning? Well, the issue is it takes power to heat, and electric heaters are really inefficient. So if you did that, you wouldn't have enough power really to move around at the bottom. So whenever we got to the bottom, we wanted to move around to explore. So you trade off being warm and exploring. So we kept it about like at, low 50 degrees in there. So it would get cold because you're in a big metal ball at the bottom of the ocean, which is at freezing temperature. So people don't get that. They go, how come you're always wearing a hat or gloves? It goes cold.
Literally. I just started scuba diving. I got certified in Thailand a couple months ago.
Wow.
So fun.
Yeah.
I had no idea there was a whole other world that I was just like not appreciating.
Oh, it is. And it has most of the life on planet Earth. It's 3-dimensional, and it's just an extraordinarily wonderful place. I mean, I got bitten by the bug. I started the 5 Deeps as a technological mission to develop a submersible that could go to any point at the bottom of the ocean repeatedly and safely. But once I started diving it and dove the 5 Deeps, I got hooked, and I wanted to dive more and more places. And that led to 4 years of diving that ship all over the place. And and now I want to design and build another one in a few more years, because now it's intoxicating. It's an amazing, extraordinary place.
And you said that there's kind of some interesting creatures at the bottom of the ocean.
Oh yeah.
And you said that if there's life on other planets, it probably resembles what you saw on the bottom of the ocean, not what you and I are looking at each other in humans.
I'll never forget, I had an incredible experience at the bottom of the Mariana Trench in the Challenger Deep. And
where's that at?
It's in the Pacific, about a day steaming south of Guam. It's the deepest point in the ocean. And we approached this big rock face, and it had brilliant gold and red bacterial colonies on the rock. And these were bacteria that were so large you could see them with the naked eye. They were like little stalks, and they were just very otherworldly looking. But we're in a place where there is no sunlight. Not a single photon can penetrate that deep. But there were colonies of life. It was living off of methane seeping from the rocks, from the minerals in the rock. So this was a form of life that just doesn't exist here on land. So if there is life on other planets under crushing pressures, freezing temperatures, it's going to probably look like that, not like, a 4-legged animal on the Serengeti. And so that was just so cool to see with my own eyes, like exploring another planet. And there it was right in front of me.
Wow. That's impressive.
It was great fun, and the scientists, of course, just loved it. And we were able to recover rocks from there and bring them back up. We were able to find, every dive we went on, it seemed like we found a new species, because we were going places no human had ever been before, and that had been isolated for tens, if not hundreds of millions of years. So of course we were going to find new species. And that, in some respects, shouldn't have surprised anyone, but that just shows you that we still don't know very much at all about our oceans.
I love this. For somebody who wants to live a fuller life, I mean, there's no one better to listen than you, man. Like, thank you for being such a doer and so action-oriented, and not somebody who's just sitting here. We call him the mayor of Yapville. You are the opposite of the mayor of Yapville. You are an absolute doer, and it's so fun to hear your story and be inspired by it. And I'm curious what advice you have for somebody who just wants to go out and live more.
Just do it, for God's sake. Just commit. That's what it's about. Just decide to do something and have this self-discipline and commitment to see it through. Buy a plane ticket to go somewhere you've never been before. Learn a new skill. Go to a cooking class, for God's sake. Go to a metalworking shop. Just do something. Don't be boring. Be interested in things. Be curious. And if it's not in your nature, try a little harder to be curious and learn something new every day. Be curious. Read. And don't just be a passive participant in your own life, because it goes so much more rapidly than you'll realize one day.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
No, my pleasure.
Congratulations on the life you've lived. I can't wait to see what else is to come.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got some stuff going on.
I bet you do. Hopefully we'll
It's
do it.
funny. I will say, people often ask me, one of the most frequent questions I get asked is, what are you doing next? And I have to confess, I don't love that question because I prefer not to talk about what I'm doing, because there are so many things that can go wrong and so many adjustments that you have to make. I don't like having the pressure of, well, you said you were going to do this. When were you going to do it, et cetera. I just like to do the things in their own good time with proper risk mitigation so there's no pressure from the outside. And then after they're done, I'm happy to talk about them. But that's why I keep most of the things I do quiet, and I don't need to self-promote. I don't need to get funding. So let's just attack these initiatives on their own good time. And if we need to slow down to mitigate risk, we will do that. And they'll get done when they get done.
Living in the present moment.
Living in the present moment and also being patient. It's interesting. I've done so much and people think I'm an impatient person, but actually I'm not. I'm very patient. It's, going slow to go fast. If you're slow and deliberate, it's amazing how much you can get done because haste makes waste. And if you're thoughtful, you can do a great deal in an effective way by being methodical and patient.
Well, thank you for making us all better.
Oh,
and, opening up and sharing your journey, man. I'm serious. It means a lot, and I certainly feel better for it.